fellow investors, and welcome to another episode of Ritter On Real Estate, where we teach you how to passively invest like a pro. Today, my guest is Tony Julianelle. Tony is the CEO of Atlas Real Estate. Atlas is a kind of all-in-one shop, brokerage, property manager, investment advisor that's focused on helping people own and manage investment real estate in 7 states. And so we're really excited to have you here today, Tony. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's start at the very beginning. Let's start with a little bit more. Tell the group about who you are and how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, thanks. I grew up in Nebraska, and if you're from Nebraska and you're listening to this, you know that you can never do anything publicly and not say that you're from Nebraska. I don't know what that is, but it's kind of built into us. And out of college, I joined a large national bank. I worked for Wells Fargo for about 20 years, and as a mortgage originator originally, and rose through the ranks there. Ended my career as a regional manager in the Mountain Midwest about 4.5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. And at that point, made a transition and joined Atlas Real Estate. And joined my 2 partners, Ryan and Jason, are the founders of our company. And we were just at an interesting inflection point where we could see what Atlas was, and we could see what Atlas really could become. And I had the opportunity to come in and kind of take the reins of the company from the 2 founders. And over the last couple of years, we've gone from being a company of about 20 team members in Colorado, and about somewhere around 1,500 doors that we managed of real estate, to now being a company of around 200 team members in the United States. We have another roughly 50 or 60 team members outside of the United States that are fantastic contributors to our business. And as you mentioned, we now operate across 7 states in kind of what we'd call the rodeo region of the U.S. So, and I think we're somewhere around right under 9,000 doors of real estate that we manage today. So that's a quick summary of kind of my background and how I ended up lucky enough to be here with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so, yeah, you've got I think 7 states. You said 9,000 or so doors under management. I think a pretty good hold, I would imagine, on kind of what's happening in the country, and a pulse on the market. And so kind of want to start there and just get some of your thoughts on, you're in the single family space, you're also within multifamily. I mean, what have you seen kind of this year as we've seen all the headlines? I mean, what are you guys seeing in your portfolio? What are you seeing in the properties that you're managing?
Mhm. Yeah, great question. It's a incredibly uncertain time. I think economically, broadly in the United States, you can actually, kind of choose your story right now, depending on who you want to listen to. And we try to cut through all that noise and just look at data.
Mhm.
Every day, we've got a group of analysts that are looking at data and saying, all right, what's actually happening in the market in both the multifamily space? We play in kind of a middle ground of multifamily. We don't play in the large Class A multifamily space, but in that kind of 4-unit to 75-unit building space, Class B and Class C. And the data in that market is quite different than the data in the single family for sale market or the single family for rent market. So we're watching all of that really closely. And, it's hard to prognosticate right now. It's hard to guess around what's
Mhm.
going to happen. And I mean, obviously this week we saw a positive movement on inflation. And at the same time, you and I are sitting here talking about an 8.5% inflation rate being a positive thing. I
Right.
mean, that doesn't make any sense at all, right?
Right.
When we're celebrating 8.5, that tells you, how out of control it's been. So
Yeah.
I think the other thing I'd say, Kent, is it's just as human beings, we're kind of predisposed to lean toward bad news. And it's probably something with brain chemicals and triggering our lizard
Yeah,
brain and
definitely.
our
Definitely.
fight or flight. So when we see bad news, we kind of like, oh, it's bad. It must be true, right? If it's bad news, it must be true.
Hmm.
And I tend to not lean that way. So I see some very positive things happening, particularly for owners of real estate, regardless of the economic cycle that we're in. Um, I do think there's an opportunity for rents to stay strong through a difficult economic cycle. I'm a huge proponent of home ownership, and Atlas is a huge proponent of home ownership. So being a company that helps people buy rental property and manages rental property at the same time, we want to promote to everybody that lives in a unit that we own or that we manage, that when they move out of that home, they move into one they own. We think that would be amazing. And we actually think there's enough abundance in the world for every renter to become a homeowner and an investor at some point. And then they're going to need a renter, right? So we at Atlas, we call that the virtuous cycle. You start up here as a
Hmm.
renter, you become a homeowner, you become an investor, and then you need a renter. And we would love for that to be the case. So I want to acknowledge too that it's very difficult to own a home today. And we want to help try to solve that problem as much as we can. So it is an interesting time economically. I do think the next 4 to 5 months are going to be really interesting as we see what happens um, with inflation and its impacts really across the board. And one of those big factors is going to be rent growth, and
Sure.
continued high rent growth is driving inflation numbers up. And plays a very big role in what I think the Fed's trying to fight right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're in 7 states, and that's kind of from, right, correct me, right, Arizona, all the way over to where are we? Like Nebraska, Kansas?
Sadly, we're not in Nebraska.
No.
Sadly, but we are over to Kansas and Missouri.
Gotcha.
So our 7 states are Colorado, Idaho, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Kansas, and Missouri. So kind of think about all the places you could attend a rodeo.
Yeah, I like
And
that rodeo definition. I mean, I think that's a good way to categorize that geography, because you span across in a pretty wide swath of the U.S. And I guess like to get down to a greater level of detail just around like what you're seeing in the market. How does that change from state to state? I mean, maybe you can break that down with just a
mhm.
couple examples in different states or different markets, and kind of, what are the dynamics looking like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, you're right. I mean, every market is different, and it's different both in what's driving the economic conditions in that market. So let's use Las Vegas as an example. 10 years ago, we would have said, I don't know that I want to deploy capital in Las Vegas.
Hmm.
And Vegas was very tied to the gaming industry. It was very tourist sensitive. Um, and the pandemic was an amazing stress test for Vegas because Vegas did quite well through the pandemic. And why is that? Well, it probably has a lot to do with the exodus from California
Hmm.
that is seeing massive immigration into communities like Las Vegas. And that's driving demand, which is then in turn driving home price appreciation, right? Same thing's happening in Phoenix. Phoenix is a destination for those who want to leave California, where you see, it's becoming more difficult to be a landlord in California. It's becoming more expensive to be a landlord in California. I have some good friends in California who say they love living there, but you pay almost like a club fee.
Right.
It's just that much more in taxes to
I've
be a
heard the
part of the
sunshine
club.
tax.
The sunshine tax. That's exactly right. So it's a beautiful place, but it's becoming more challenging. So what are people doing? They're looking for sunshine, and they're going to Vegas and they're going to Phoenix, and that's driving up prices. It's driving up demand, and you see a lot of capital being deployed in those markets, both in the single family and in the multifamily space. Then you go over to Kansas City, right?
Hmm.
And no one leaving California is saying we should move to Kansas City. That's not one of the cities that's on their list. So what happens in Kansas City is you get a little bit lower home price appreciation, although appreciation has been very strong there over the last 10 years, but you get a little better cash flow and you
Hmm.
get a little more accessible price points. So for example, if you came to me today and said, I'd like to buy a quadplex and I have, this much money to spend, that might determine where we deploy that money for you. If you want to buy a quadplex in Arizona and the Phoenix area, you're going to spend, 700 to, well, let's say 500 to $800,000 for a quadplex. If you go to Kansas City, you're going to spend maybe half of that. And that's an opportunity for someone with fewer resources to actually get in the game a little bit. So that's why we like that diversity. And everybody
Hmm.
has different goals. So as our
Right.
clients come to us, some clients, they want to knock it out of the park on home price appreciation. They want to have a defined hold period and they want to realize their gains. Other clients come and say, I really don't like other asset classes. I'd rather have a real asset that's going to create cash flow for me. So we're going to look at those two things really differently.
Yeah, and that's going to determine, some of the geography that they choose.
That's right.
Some of those demand drivers in more of like, so we understand, I think on the West, there's a lot of, like you said, the migration out of California. We're seeing a lot of appreciation there. Also a lot of new supply coming in, right? And just
Yeah.
new growth in general. Or I think as you get to again more the Midwestern Kansas City side, that's where a lot of my portfolio exists, is in the Midwest. And
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing demand increase, but more than that, I think we're just seeing the lack of supply that is really causing that appreciation. So it seems to be kind of different. On the west side, maybe it's more demand driven. On the as you get toward the middle, maybe it's just more supply constrained. Is just what I've kind of come to understand as I'm looking at things.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few factors there. So one of them is if you're a home builder and you earn your income primarily as a percentage of the sale price of a property, right? So you've got a markup that's 10, 12%.
Hmm.
Do you want to build homes in California and Arizona, or do you want to build them in Missouri?
Yeah.
You're just going to make more money, the higher
Right.
price points. So, and then you have areas like, let's take Denver, for example, where I live and where our company is based. Denver has some unique geographic constraints.
Hmm.
Uh, the Rocky Mountains are very difficult to overcome if you're trying to build homes.
Right.
The other thing we look at is water supply. And when you think about what it takes right now to get a permit to build in Colorado, water is a very, very scarce resource. And the same is happening in Phoenix and in Las Vegas. So, those things definitely drive it. The other thing that's happening that very few people talk about that you're benefiting from in your portfolio, Ken, is that everybody who grew up in a town like Pella, Iowa, is moving to Kansas City.
Yep.
The small towns are losing their residents, right? So
Yeah.
when those kids go off to college, they go to college somewhere, or they go get a job somewhere, and they end up in a city like Kansas City. All those little towns around Kansas City within 3-4 hours of driving distance. Those kids end up in Kansas City, and then they never leave. And that is really bad for small towns, and it's really good for communities like Kansas City.
Yeah, we've absolutely seen that in the Midwest. I mean, Indianapolis has been benefited from that, which is where I'm based. You see the migration from more the secondary cities in the state, and then even the secondary cities have benefited from more the small towns and those
That's
tertiary
right.
towns and villages. So yeah, absolutely, we're
Yeah,
seeing kind of that consolidation into larger markets.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
and
interesting.
that's going to be ongoing, right? That's a reality, and I think it's one that doesn't get talked about very often.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about something you brought up at the beginning. You brought up you're the CEO of Atlas now, but you partnered with the two founders, and you said you really did that at an inflection point in the company. So I wanted to just get back to that. Kind of what was that inflection point, and then talk about that growth path from where you were, to where you guys are now.
Yeah, so a little bit of the story of Atlas. Back in 2008, real estate went on sale through the global financial crisis, really driven by real estate loans, right? So, as people talk about the recession that we're in or not in, depending on whose definition of recession you want to
Right.
use,
It's all changing, right?
um, it's all changing. But they think back to 2008, 2009, which was fundamentally different and was really a credit crisis
Right.
that drove what happened there. My two partners said, "Hey, real estate's on sale. Let's just go buy a lot of it." And they were able to, during a difficult time, to raise money and acquire a fairly substantial portfolio of single-family homes for rent. Well, right about then, there were a few institutions that said, hey, maybe owning single family rental properties could be a new asset class. So prior to 2010, 2011, the only people who owned single family rental properties were individuals, what we
Sure.
call the mom and pop investor, right?
Hmm.
Where multifamily, of course, institutions have been involved in multifamily for a very long time. Institutions started to say maybe we could do scattered site single family. And my partners sold their first portfolio to Colony American Homes, which is now Invitation Homes, the largest owner of single
Hmm.
family for rent in the United States. And at that time, they said, hey, why don't you buy it for us? And what was happening then is they were trying to find what they called local operators to acquire on their behalf, primarily at foreclosure sales. And so we kind of cut our teeth on that as a company. And then back in 2018, there was this thing called Zillow Offers, and you probably followed this. Zillow
Yeah.
decided we're gonna pay cash for your house, right? And all in an effort to generate seller leads for real estate agents, right?
Hmm.
Zillow didn't want to own houses. And we had good friends at Zillow who knew that we were a very good acquisition team, and we became the partner in Colorado. So we bought and sold about 1,000 homes for Zillow during that run. And that's when I joined the company. Was this kind of an inflection point moment where we were talking about we have this acquired pedigree, if you will, of being very effective at evaluating and acquiring assets.
Hmm.
And how do we put that to use more broadly? That's kind of the skill set, if you will. And
Sure.
then we had this company that had this amazing culture and a group of people that loved their work and loved each other, loved to be together. And we just said, what if we could leverage this to do more of this, right? What if we could take this acquired expertise over time and use that to create a place where people love their work, they love being together, they thrive, and they're able to bring their whole selves into the work that they do. And that was really compelling for us. And that was kind of the inflection point to say there is a demand for something we're very good at, and that will allow us to create jobs for team members that are really focused on human flourishing. And that's really been what's driven our company forward.
Ah, well, that's a cool story. And so now you guys are really focusing on kind of buying and managing. I mean, there's multifamily in there too, but I mean, it's multifamily, like you said, kind of in the middle market, smaller scale. So it really is a lot of scattered site, a lot of single families, but you're focused on doing it really at scale, right? You have how many
Yeah.
houses now, or how many homes in the portfolio?
Yeah, so our owned portfolio in partnership with a capital partner is just under 2,000 homes.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, so that's a significant size, and so obviously there's a lot that goes into that. So I'm curious about, you know, the I've always thought about single family as kind of an inefficient thing. At one point I had about 11 of them, right, and it was a pain
Yeah,
in the butt. Um,
yeah,
But obviously there's a lot of groups that are doing it really successfully. And once you reach a level of scale, you still get those same economies. And so talk just a little bit about that, like running 2,000 homes, that's,
Yeah,
I mean, how does that work? What does the business look like? What's the team look like? How do you manage
yeah,
all of that?
yeah. It's a great question. So, I mean, you hit on kind of the number one objection as an investor is scattered site single family is just more difficult, more expensive to manage at scale than a large building, right? You have one building, it got built at the same time, all the systems in it are the same age, they're all the same
Hmm.
systems, right?
Yep.
I just had this conversation with a client of ours around a data project that we're doing to look at the age of every dishwasher in every house that we own. And when's it going to fail? How do we plan for that? How do we
Mhm.
consider it an expense ratio? So, it is more complicated,
Yeah.
certainly, which is probably why a lot of people don't do it. And there's an old Warren Buffett quote that I probably use way too much, but he says, "When people are greedy, you should be afraid, and when people are afraid, you should get a little greedy."
Hmm.
And I don't like the word greed. I want to use the word opportunistic. But when I look at a field where there is tremendous, like massive demand for single
Hmm.
family rental properties, and a lot of people who either don't want to do it or frankly don't have the expertise to do it well, that creates an opportunity for us.
Sure.
So a few things about that. Number one is, our company was founded by and is run today by people who own real estate. One of the key metrics that we measure for our team members is the average number of owned doors per team member. And that's really important to us because you're going to approach how you think about the work very differently when you own your own real estate. So we promote that. We have incentives around it for our team members. We want everybody to own real estate. So that's number one. Number two is just really part of why I joined the organization was to move us toward institutional grade management. And to be institutional grade really means that we are managing in a way. I put in a couple categories. First, that our residents are experiencing an institutional grade experience, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that means we're responsive. We handle work orders. We care about their experience as a resident, not just about if they delivered a rent check on the first. And that's really a big difference between the institutional owner and the mom and pop owner. And I'm not picking on mom and pops. There's some wonderful individual landlords. There really are. And then there are a lot of them who just don't understand the complexity of maintenance and don't have the bandwidth to do it well. So that's part of being institutional grade. Another part of it is really accessing and utilizing data well, and that takes an investment. That's a technology investment. It's a people investment to be able to say, I can tell you what my average cost of and days to turn a property by zip code.
Hmm.
I can tell you, I can anticipate vacancy by submarket. But I can only do that with good data, right?
Right.
And the job of a property manager is to constantly be at battle with vacancy, right? That's the enemy.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then the more data I have, uh, the better I'm able to fight the war against vacancy.
Yeah.
So institutional grade means I've got data that enables me to do my work and do it really well. And so I think that's a big deal for single family for rent, even on a smaller scale. Even if
Right.
if you own 10 or 12 doors of single family, being able to approach that more as an asset manager than just a property manager,
Yeah.
I think is a powerful differentiator.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that, as I look at even in our multi portfolio and the advantage that large groups have versus the individual, I mean, it does come down to data. It comes around to the resources and I mean, one, the ability just to purchase the data, but the ability to and the expertise to go in and really make that data into usable information, right? So what I'd love to dig into that a little more with you and just talk about some of the systems that you guys have put in place to be able to, like you said, know or predict vacancy or
Yeah.
understand, like the dishwasher project. Like that's interesting. I love that. I love the ability to predict out and be able to forecast costs. So can you talk a little bit more about what that data structure looks like, what kind of sources you're using, who do you have manipulating the data, kind of what's coming out of it? Just talk a little bit about that because that does sound like an advantage for you guys.
Yeah. Um, yeah, we made the choice a couple of years ago to invest in a data lake and a data warehouse. And if you ask me to tell you the difference, I won't be able to. But what I do know is that we use a number of different technologies. So we use our property management software. We use a leasing software
Hmm.
that isn't fully integrated with property management software. Within our company, we use a workflow software, right? Where we're able to track projects from beginning to end. And our acquisition team uses a different software. So we've got all this kind of disparate data, if you
Yeah.
will, and the ability to take all of it and put it in one place and then use a tool. Some people use Tableau. We use Microsoft BI, Business Insights, to then parse that data from all those different sources. So I can look at a property and I can say, it's had this many leads, it's had this many applications, and that is different by zip code. So the
Hmm.
ability to build out a data warehouse and then access that data in a meaningful way, that's a big investment. And there aren't many property management companies, I think, that have the wherewithal to make that kind of an investment.
Yeah, and I think that I would agree with you. And then talk a little bit about I mean, all of that, all the outputs of that data is all based on having good inputs, though. So, how do you
Yeah.
build a culture in the organization where people are accountable for having quality inputs? Because I mean, I think it's easy to skip a lot of that, and not want to put a lot of that detail in that ultimately that at the property manager level, they might not understand why, oh, now I got to enter this extra thing, right? And they don't understand how that really builds out. So talk about how you built that accountability into the culture.
That's exactly right. We just had this conversation this morning with some of our leaders. I say a lot in our company. It's one thing to have a process. It's an entirely different thing to have process adherence.
Hmm.
And we take that into account with every process we build. The question is, great, we've got this cool new process. I had a mentor once who said, Tony, every idea has to devolve into work. And if
Yeah.
it doesn't, it wasn't a good idea, right? So being cognizant of the person in the field who's going to have to execute the process. And then we start to ask the question, okay, knowing that person in the field, knowing their workload, knowing their skill set, is this a process they should execute? And if the answer is yes, then we build a training around it, and then we build an inspection process, right?
Yeah.
If the answer is no, then we create a role. And I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So in the single family for rent space, in several markets, the MLS is actually where you list your rental properties, right? So when you do that, you need to have good descriptions. You need to have great photographs. And if a property gets listed without good photographs, that is going to prolong my vacancy.
Yeah.
Now, should my property manager be the person who's checking the website from the photograph company and making sure that it's uploaded into the MLS? We decided no, we should have a photo specialist, right? So we have a team member who their job is to every day go in and look at what photos came in and then marry them to the property on the listing, whether that's listing within our property management software, whether it's on the MLS. Those things syndicate out, double checking the syndication. So we're designing the process around adherence, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Because if you don't have any data anyway.
Right.
And let's just look that in the eye, right? And let's not just drop processes on people who either don't have the bandwidth or don't have the skill set to do them.
Well, I think that's interesting. I appreciate you sharing that because I think that, I mean, that's something, and maybe I'm so interested right now because as we grow, it's something that's on the top of my mind is data uh, is critical. I mean, believe that you can't make decisions without good data. And yeah, how do you adhere to that, and how do you build roles and process? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
sounds like you guys have been able to do that very well.
Uh, we do. We work at it every single day.
Right.
So the mantra in our company is, if I can't measure it, I can't manage it.
That's right.
And so we're constantly looking for ways to measure better.
Yeah, I'm curious as you're looking at, your own portfolio and even what you manage for others. I think you said you have about 9,000 units. What does that look like from a management structure? Um, because I like, big multifamily, you have a manager on each property. You obviously can't do that. So how do you
Yeah,
create maybe groupings and structure the management and maintenance for your properties?
it's a great question. So historically, in a lot of property management companies, they create silos, right? So you have a property manager, you have an asset manager, you have a leasing person, you have a
Mhm.
maintenance person. It's actually really difficult to create alignment for all of those people, right? So your leasing person, you really want to lease properties, right? It's really all you want them to do. Well, they may not be aligned with the asset manager around what the pricing should be on that property. So
Mhm.
you end up with silos that just aren't that healthy, in our opinion. Now, it's not that that process doesn't work. We just think there might be a better way to do it. So
Sure.
we have what we call a pod approach. So each of our property managers kind of sits within a pod, and in their pod, they have a leasing specialist who reports to them. They have a maintenance coordinator who reports to them. They have an assistant property manager who reports to them. And each of those roles is fairly well defined. And that property manager really owns the relationship with the resident in the property and with the owner of the property. And by doing that, we drive more alignment, right?
Mhm.
And we incent our team based on occupancy and based on client resident experience scores, satisfaction scores. So we're really looking at two things. Is the property occupied and collected? And is the resident happy, and is the owner happy?
Yeah.
And if we ring those three bells, everything else kind of takes care of itself. And by aligning everybody with one kind of portfolio manager, property manager type role, we found that to be really effective.
Yeah, interesting. I like that. So you're creating a pod, and how many units, or how do you decide, like, how big is a pod?
It's kind of a weighting process, so it depends on, if you're managing a lot of small multifamily, that's value add, that's not yet stabilized, you're going to have a much smaller pod.
Mhm.
If you're managing broadly single family that's stabilized, you're going to have a much larger pod. So pods range anywhere from 100 doors to 400 doors, depending on the tenure of the pod leader and the type of assets that they're managing.
Gotcha. Very interesting. I appreciate you breaking that down for us.
Yeah, yeah. And then some of those other roles, like I mentioned, the photo specialist, right? Not
Yeah.
every pod needs one of those. So
Sure.
those are roles that kind of exist within the the broader business, and they have a certain capacity, and then we need a second photo person, and we need, you know,
Yeah.
those roles are a little more specialized.
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing you mentioned that I was curious about, are you really encourage your folks to own real estate, and you even incentivize them to own real estate. So, one, I think that's fantastic. Two, I want to understand what that looks like.
Yeah. So it's a couple of things. First, we're cultish about real estate.
Hmm.
So, and our executive team is cultish about real estate. I mean, we're oddly cultish about real estate. And so there's a few things that we do. One is we set the expectation when someone joins our company that our intention for them, if they aren't already a homeowner, is that they would be a homeowner within their first year of employment. And the fact that we're a brokerage means that we get to uh, create discounts and help enable them to do that.
Yeah.
We actually don't offer a 401k plan at our company. And the reason we don't is that we would much rather our team invest in real estate. We actually believe wholeheartedly that real estate is a better path for them to accumulate wealth over time.
Yeah.
So we've got some processes in place around that. And then, we just do a lot of education. And there's something about, there's intentional education, right? We do what we call boot camp sessions, where we teach people how to evaluate real estate, how to think about real estate as an investment. But there's just a lot of tacit knowledge that happens, right? And this idea that just being around it all day long, you're
Yeah.
going to pick it up, right? There's kind of an apprenticeship type feel to owning real estate in our company, and I think that is positive. And one of the things that I'll often, when one of the younger team members will come to me and say, "Gosh, I'll give you an example. A guy on our team who joined us a year out of college and has an uncle who's a wealth advisor, a successful wealth advisor, who's telling him, no, man, not real estate. You just, you buy index funds, buy index funds." And I said, hey, next time you're with your whole family, I want you to ask everybody over the age of 40 if they wish they owned more real estate or less real estate. Just that simple of a question, and see what happens, right? And there are very few people over the age of 40 who are going to say, man, I just wish I hadn't bought real estate when I was younger.
Right.
That's not going to happen. So I think that those are the stories we want to tell, and we want to enable people to think about how they can buy their first home, and then we would say house hack that first home, right?
Yeah.
That's a fun term that's out there. I think it's maybe a little overused these days, but turn that one into a rental and go buy the next one. And
Right.
and there's a strategy to this, right? You're not going to buy the same house if you think you're buying a house just because you're going to enjoy it. That's different than buying a house because you want it to be an asset that
Mhm.
accumulates wealth for you over time. So you're going to think differently about the first home that you buy, and that's part of how we equip our team.
Gotcha. So you're helping educate them to understand, to not look at it as you're going out and buying the dream home, but buying a home that could become an asset, because you're going to be moving into several homes, and that's how you're going to build your portfolio over time.
That's right.
That makes a lot of sense. And so, and not to get into like the details of it, but it sounds like you said you don't do a 401k plan, but you have developed some sort of incentive structure inside to help people kind of
Yeah.
toward the real estate, or however that's going to work. That's pretty interesting. I've not heard of that before.
Yeah, I mean, it helps that we're a brokerage, right? So we have access to resources, we have access to funds within the transaction
Hmm.
that can help make the transaction happen. So, and we
Yeah.
we love using those resources to help people buy their homes.
Well, really cool. I think that's a fantastic piece of the mission of the company, and you're helping get more people into real estate, which is, the mission of this podcast as well. So we're well aligned. And so,
We're aligned. That's
well,
great.
Tony, I appreciate you coming on today. Before I let you go, I want to take you through our keys to success round. I got 4 questions I want to ask you. The first one is, if you were going to invest in somebody else's deal and somebody else's property, right? And you could only ask them one question, what would that one question be?
Would you invest your mother's money in this deal?
I like that one. I actually have invested my mother's money in a couple of deals, so I can,
Yeah,
I can
so have
answer.
I. I get it.
You can answer yes, but yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you're getting. I think you're getting to the heart of risk management, right? And how likely are we to lose that investment? So
That's right. Do you really believe in it? And
Yeah.
that's a pretty good litmus test.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you most proud of in your career?
I get asked this from time to time, and it's actually an easy question for me. I am so proud of the people that I've been able to work with. And just the other day, I was on a call with someone that I hired 15 years ago, and who worked for me for a period of time, became my peer at our company, and is now in a very impressive role at a very impressive company. And it's just so cool to see people that you helped along the way who are now, exceeding anything I'll ever do and making a positive impact on the world and on their teams. And that's something it warms me up when I see that happen.
Yeah, awesome. You're making a big impact over the years by elevating people. What is a book that everybody should read?
If you haven't read The Alchemist by Sam Coelho, I highly recommend it. And it's one of my favorite books. And it is not necessarily a business book. It's certainly not a real estate book, but it is one that will help shape how you see the world, I think, in some positive ways.
Oh, very good. And then last but not least, what is your number one key to success?
Mentors. And when I look back at my life, in fact, my wife and I just spent a few days away from our kids last week, and we took some time to reflect. And we always come back to, we've been married 23 years. We really like each other. We look at our life and we're so grateful.
Mhm.
And we come back to the difference maker for us was great mentors. And that's been true in my career. It's been true in my marriage and in life overall. So find people that are ahead of you, 10 or 15 years ahead of you, who you are inspired by,
Mhm.
and allow them to mentor you. Ask them, be proactive. Ask them, hey, will you mentor me? Will you coach me? Coaching is the new word, right? And I'm so grateful for the handful of people that have really shaped me over the last 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's critical. It helps you avoid a lot of the mistakes that they've already been through, right? And short circuit some of those processes.
That's right. I will acquire wisdom from anyone who will give it to me.
Yeah. Well, that is a great attitude. Not everybody sees it that way. Some people have to touch the stove to know it's hot.
That's right.
Well, awesome, Tony. I appreciate you coming on today. But before we let you go, I want to make sure that people know how to get a hold of you and how to learn more about Atlas Real Estate.
Yeah. So feel free to reach out anytime. My email is really easy. It's tony@realatlas.com. My last name's Julianelle, and I love that I don't have to spell it to get you to be able to email me. And you can
That's
also check us
helpful.
out at our website, realatlas.com. There's a lot of information about our company there. So happy to be of help in any way that I can be.
Awesome. Well, Tony Julianelle, thank you so much for coming on today. And I hope you have a great rest of the day.
You too. Thank you. Thanks for having me.